Welcome back to Sky's Not the Limit. So this video will be on a subject that's basically the subject matter in general that my most viewed video is of, except more focusing on kind of the first part of it. In other words, that part, the free energy part. Now, this is kind of a bit of a tricky subject to tackle, but basically I'll be talking about the Casimir effect and basically some concepts about it, and basically whether or not the basic concept actually makes sense as an energy mechanism. This is basically the most well-known supposed form of energy interacting with the vacuum, or the way to do so, and it pretty much is the only stable and well-known one at this point, outside maybe a few kind of obscure concepts. But basically the idea is that there's more pressure exerted on the outsides of these plates, because on the inside and on the outside there are particles and antiparticle pairs, as well as associated waves of energy appearing from the quantum vacuum, and only a certain wavelength can exist within, that being wavelengths that are the size or smaller than the spacing between the plates. And so since the larger wavelengths outside somewhat create more pressure than the ones inside, there is a net inward force pushing the plates together. As you can see from the equation for the amount of force per area for this effect, the effect does become extremely strong as the plates get closer and closer, which could be useful, but unfortunately it's not really clear how this could be used for extracting extra energy beyond what initially was there when the plates were separated. Now, it is true that there is actually a way to get a repulsive Casimir force, where if you have a certain combination as shown here, you can actually cause there to be, well, the opposite interaction with the vacuum. Now, explaining exactly why that's the case would be a little bit tricky, but as shown here, it does have to do with how basically materials with permittivity, which is how they respond to electric fields, how they would act differently if you were dealing with a conductor or if you're dealing with a dielectric. And interestingly enough, this also shows that it can be, the effect, that is, can be seen with a fluid, not just vacuum or a gas. So that's also interesting, because that does mean that in theory this could be used within liquid systems, although that might be more in depth than what I want to go into. However, that unfortunately, that being the repulsive effects, still doesn't seem to give a means of actually creating or generating energy from it, because it's basically just like a spring. You could maybe use it to store energy, but it's not really clear how you would actually generate it. Now, a dynamical Casimir effect is where you can actually generate photons from the vacuum by moving or accelerating the conductive plate material at extremely great speed, which will actually cause particle-antiparticle pairs to be pulled essentially from the vacuum. Now, this does seem kind of promising, because I mean, it sounds like, oh, if you can generate it from the vacuum, then could you have some kind of free energy from that? Unfortunately, as you can see, or you'll see in a second from this paper, it does not appear that, based on some fairly solid math, that the force actually produces any more energy than is put in. That is, the dynamic Casimir force is kind of just a reaction force, in the same way that you'd be having a reaction force if you're moving a magnet close to a material. It just acts as something to oppose your generated force. However, this does seem to suggest an interesting possibility, which is, could you then use this as a means to potentially push on the quantum vacuum in some way? Now, that actually could be pretty useful for something else, and I'm sure some people can guess what that is, but without going too in depth into that, So though that outlook so far seems kind of bleak, there are certainly some concepts that are out there for how you could potentially affect or generate energy from the source. And I certainly, unlike PBS spacetime, I won't be saying that it's impossible because it just appears to be at this point. So, make sure to join me in the future for a video where I'll basically be delving into maybe another possible way that this effect could potentially work. And make sure to like, share, and subscribe because obviously that's very helpful. If you want to, of course. And I am going to certainly be trying to focus more on the scientific videos for this channel. And potentially also I'll be uploading a more experiment-related video for anybody who's interested in that somewhat soon. Although I'm not completely sure if that'll be before the next one of the videos about this particular subject. But anyhow, thank you very much for watching.